So welcome everybody. We're going to start this off. We're still getting used to doing this whole virtual event thing, but we're so thrilled to be able to welcome Jabari Asim and Deborah D.E.E.P Mouton with us virtually here on Zoom. And they're going to be reading from their two new books, Stop and Frisk from Jabari Asim and Newsworthy from Deborah D.E.E.P Mouton. So, and then they'll be having a kind of a conversation, and also they will be able to answer questions through the chat box. So we'll have that available as well. So to start off, let's see, Deborah, did you want to read first, or Jabari, would you like to? Well, let me just pick something. So Deborah, you're going to be up first, okay? Is that all right?
Yeah, that's
okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone, and then I will be unmuting Deborah so that she'll be able to speak to us. So we're going to talk. I'm going to read her introduction first, and then I'll do the mute for everyone. So Deborah is an internationally recognized performance poet, and she's the first African-American poet laureate of Houston. Formerly ranked #2 female performance poet in the world, she is executive director of VIP Arts, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting literacy and the arts in underserved populations. Her genre-bending poetry has engendered unconventional collaborations with groups as disparate as the Rockets and the Houston Ballet. Her work has been featured on NPR, the BBC, and the TEDx circuit. She will be reading from her new book of poetry, Newsworthy. All right, Deborah, wait me 1 second. I'm going to mute, and then I will unmute you. Okay.
Hello, hello. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Becky, for having me, and Jabari. It's great to be able to read with my pressmate. So thank you all for kind of tuning in here and to taking some time away from your evening to just spend some time talking about an issue I think is really pressing for all of us and has become even more pressing in the last few weeks. When I sat down to kind of write Newsworthy, I really was struck by the idea of kind of coming into age of understanding racism and understanding how one is kind of brought up into the ideas of perceiving oneself and the environment around you through this lens. And so as you hear in Newsworthy, that is my hope, right? Is to start to peel back the layers of this conversation and start to really be able to say, on a human level, what are the things that we can do to understand what's happening and to be able to start moving forward towards exploring and really researching and diving into some solutions. So I will start off, just a heads up for everyone. I definitely got given a cold by my child. That is all it is. There's nothing more serious than that. So you may see me like slow down or do a sniffle here and there. I will try not to give you my elephant nose blow on screen, but it does exist because children keep on giving. So the first time around the block. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Feet syncopate hopscotch under ripe street lights. Sun crawls down the backside of the mountain. We sand our hands in 4 squares on rubber balls. We bounce Sally Walker and a cool drink of Kool-Aid powdered and sugared Ziploc till all parts of our mouths are stained, cherry, rebel, defiant. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Streets so alive in LA. Don't know when it want the night to come, just want the day forever. Run like highway. Turn ourselves invisible when mama calls. Don't take that ball, angry the day done left you, boy. That street light not hot yet. Ignore the glow for the sting of pop rocks in our cheeks and big league tiring our chew. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. This time, when mama calls, seems more ambulance in her throat. More flashing light in her eyes. More than just a halogen flickering bulb on concrete. She says our names like they are blood moons on a clear sky that no one wants to see. Like a routine turned into red mouth outcry. A frenzy of our shadowy feet cockroaching from the asphalt towards our mother's arms unaware. 5, 4, 3, 2, run. The unknowing left that night. We watched their feet turn Rodney soccer ball. Police no longer a place to run when lost. Police run longer or be a lost place. Colored lips gushing a bloody drink, more thirsty for the darkness than the sun, and we, a chalk outline number needing to be stomped. For me, everything kind of started with the beating of Rodney King as a young child, living just outside LA and coming into town and cleaning up the riots and starting to understand that my Blackness put me at a greater danger than my parents had ever had a chance to show me. And so you'll see in the book, if you have the book, thank you for purchasing it. If you don't, this is the guilt trip to purchase it. And so you'll see that the book is kind of segmented into more reactionary poems to things that maybe were more of our newsworthy topics that are kind of interjected with personal accounts about my family and myself. And I use the name Amandla to discuss myself. So if you see that name, that's me. Josh, 15, ventures out, an adolescent need for speed. He forgoes dressing, white flag of a t-shirt and boxer shorts. He's not planning on stopping anywhere. Officers pull him over on the 91 between Compton and his home. Say he was driving 20 over the limit. Say he was swerving but don't test his breath. They record his name as an alias for a fugitive of similar name. Different face, address, age, but similar name. Wanted for grand theft auto. Josh, visibly shaken, denies any affiliation. Still booked. He is now suspect. He calls his mother, but it's the middle of the night. It rings unanswered in the dark. Weird silhouettes, bodies morphed into shadows, lost to the spotlight. I can remember at a young age, kind of the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And for the longest, I wanted to be an artist, a visual artist, actually, which is funny because I am not great at drawing. But I really wanted to do it. My husband, who is a visual artist now, makes fun of me for this grand dream. And quickly after my brother was arrested, I found myself wanting to go into law and kind of having this passion for justice at a very young age of realizing that, my brother, who was 15 at the time, being locked in a maximum security prison without his fingerprints ever being run, were a thing that I wanted to champion and fight for young voices that were lost the same way. And really wanted to pursue law. I did mock trial for multiple years. And my mom called me the Barracuda, right? Like I was vicious. But as I got older, I started to realize that there was a lot of minutia in the paperwork, right? And the research that wasn't the thing I was passionate about. What I was passionate about was young people and being able to advocate for them. And I found for me, that landed more in the area of teaching, which is what I do now. And I think for me, that's also why, the cases that really drew close to my heart were a lot of the times of young children. When I started to write this book, it really was a reactionary to Trayvon Martin and his murder. And so for me, a lot of the pieces are centered around that. And you'll see the cover of the book, which is right here, is this kind of great inception by Fulu of thinking through one of the poems and how, the lens quickly changed, and I say it's changed, not like racism has never existed, but just that my eyes were open to the overwhelming amount of bodies that were falling in a very short amount of time around Trayvon Martin and since then. And it caused me to write the poem Open Season, which inspired the cover of the book. I have felt the weather changing, seen the falling leaves painting the sidewalk a mosaic of autumn. As a transplanted Texan, these hoof-printed falls remind me of one thing. This year, I heard the government is opening hunting season early. Now, every good hunter knows you need something to be successful. A good dog and a good gun. Got to have something to sniff and some way to shoot. It's important to get as close to your target as humanly possible. Make sure they can't see you clearly. This can be tricky. Hunting through the thicket and the cloak of night offer easy solutions. Now, there's no use in standing on top of an open hill, watching surrounding pastures and bushy banks if they're out of range. No. A better location is just inside the hood, woods. So that if a boy, buck approaches, you can move back and stalk through cover. Now, this could take years to perfect. I spotted one once, dark fur, oversized antlers, say the ones whose pelt sags just below their waist has the most tender innards. This one looked injured. Dick, when he walked hand holding his privates like somebody already took a shot at him, looked under 25. That's good. Get him too old, they might have learned how to run, might have learned how to keep quiet and invisible. They say the most popular attractant is corn, but I've learned flashy jewelry, loud music do the trick. Want a guaranteed kill? You can use some paper money. You can also purchase a call. One sounds like a mother's voice screaming out to Jesus, the other, the ringing of Sean's wedding bells. The last one sounds like a sweet young girl whispering, I love you. Anything that sounds familiar or offers false hope. Once you got them in your crosshairs, aim right under the hoodie, stand your ground, shoot and kill, invite a friend, tell him, we don't shoot to eat, we hunt for the fun of the sport. Let's see how many rounds we can put in him for his knees to buckle, before his family come looking for him, the younger it is we catch him, the more likely it is we'll make the news. Picture us standing next to his 145-pound trophied body like the catch of a lifetime. We could be legends like Irwin v. Crocodile or Fudd v. Duck or Police v. Every Black Body. It's human nature that the more dominant species assert themselves over the one who posed the greatest threat. That's how you define a hero here in this thicket and this rush. They can try to camouflage themselves, but nothing that young, that black, that male will ever fit in. I followed one once for 19 blocks. Let my canine sniff out his blackberry scent. Didn't have my shotgun, so I just shot till my gun was empty. I wore his skin like a Halloween costume. They say the darker the hide, the sweeter the blood. And this year I've learned the government is waiving fees for permits. All you need is a rifle, a motive, a good hiding place. Try an alley next to a low-performing high school. Don't have one, use your own front yard. Plant a hedge, stand in plain sight. Remember, if they come near you, it's only defending yourself. This is the circle of life. Somebody gotta be predator. Something, someone always gotta pray. And I found myself like lingering in Trayvon Martin a little bit longer. I feel like a lot of the media had something to do with pushing that forward, not just because we saw riots and we saw murals and we saw this outcry, but they started to spend so much time on George Zimmerman, right? I've never, I don't know, maybe it's just my age at the time, but I'd never seen someone spend so much time on someone who was accused of killing someone. In this scenario, quickly Trayvon Martin became this thug kid, and all of the goodness of him was ripped out in the headlines of the media. And I started to see that the news that was happening in the neighborhood was very different from that was happening on my TV screen. And so I continued to write about Trayvon Martin in a poem called Sanford Suite. I remember the iced tea we used to brew on my mother's back porch just outside her garden. How it steeped against the ground till deep-seated. How the sticky, sweet Alabama honey stuck to our everywhere. I wonder how hard they had to scrub to get the Trayvon off. Was it calm George calling it in? Dream of paradise under an Arizona rainbow, sepia ignorant bliss. Whisper under breath, if we stack flowers at every site, this world can be eaten. Again, I stand here in the wilderness of kitchen, the linoleum tiles dry bubbling beneath my bare feet. Our nursery is quiet tonight for all the right reasons. The area of Crib Mobile plays soundtrack to a muted television. Over a casket of fruit spoiling before a bite. Under the crescendo of kettle and the most shameful whispers say, I'm so glad we had a girl. And for a long time, I thought that there was something innately specific about women that got, left out of this conversation. And we do, we get left out. We don't get ignored by it. We're not, we're still victims of it. We still go missing, but just happens to be that the media doesn't like to pay attention to us, right? I can't tell you how many Black men I've seen die on video. And I remember a handful of women that ever even got a highlight. For me, Sandra Bland was the first one I actually saw a video, but the first person I saw die was a Black man in a viral video that auto played on Facebook, right? When I wasn't even looking for it. And so to think through, how does gender complicate a conversation that's already a really difficult one, right? How do we find ourselves in the wake of looking, Black maternal rights and people like Breonna Taylor in the face, right? And saying like, what does the layer of gender add to this as we start to narrow in? And even the gender that lives outside the lines, right? Trans women have been dying historically and still have yet to get the coverage that they deserve. And so, we start to really see that even within this kind of nuance of saying Black Lives Matter, that there are these layers of different kinds of Black lives that all have to be somehow put on an equitable ground to matter in the media, and so I started to write in the book. You'll start to see that there's a turn that starts to shift towards the women, right? That starts to say that we have an equal space and place in this conversation that should be discussed. And so I'm going to read two more short poems that are more geared towards the women. I'll say the first one for me was much more about my own danger, right? Of coming into this knowledge of understanding that as a Black woman, there was nothing that was going to save me from myself becoming victim, and from people who look like me becoming victim. And I found that kind of being run off the road in Beeville, Texas, in a pickup truck in the middle of the night. So this is called On Baltimore from Beeville. Work found us in Beeville, where the prison is currency and the hotels give fresh cookies to cut the taste of fear after 6. The sun rose in the lobby over Texas-shaped waffles, Fruit Loops, thick oatmeal. This town no destination, reports the national news. Star-spangled birthplace finds police officer unresponsive after rioters attacked. Fire sparked during the funeral of Freddie Gray, whom police left to suffocate under the weight of his own body on the cold floor of their van while they watched without response. This is a test. This station is conducting a test. If this had been an actual emergency. Truckers mouth a murmured slur over continental breakfast of bleached biscuits smothered in brown gravy. Clench their fists till purple pulses around each knuckle. We sit at a separate but equal banquet, chewing slowly, wondering what part of Texas we waded into. And then for me, soon after that, I was confronted with the murder of Sandra Bland. And I'm going to say it's a murder. I know what news says, whatever. 38 miles from my back door, right? And more than that was I just had a daughter. And more than that was that my best friend was close friends with Sandra Bland and intended on introducing us at a party that I didn't get to go to, right? Because he said we were like spirits. And this idea of degrees of separation quickly fell away, right? I agree with you. If she wasn't in jail, she would definitely be alive. Okay, just I'm reading the comments and I should just also be reading. Okay, so I'll close this out with a poem that I call Personal Effects. And I actually had the honor of reading this at the memorial site for Sandra Bland, under the tree where she was arrested. So this is for Sandra Bland, for Tatiana Jefferson, for Breonna Taylor, and for every woman who has found herself victim, especially in the past few years. They will try to sell you the myth of my lips, that I talked myself into more trouble than my color would let me live through. Try to convince you I knew how to chameleon into 2 hours of unangled camera feed static with 2 hands, mistook myself for Hera, dangled myself from gold-chained plastic bags. They will try to say I was quicksand. Too much Texas, not enough blind obey. My character, tin can on a backwood fence. Tell them I've never sat still enough to be anyone's easy target. Tell them I've never been able to stretch my lips wide enough to swallow my whole self. This time, the body in the cell had no holy water for spit, but had more God in her than the Bible belts. Make them wince until my name echoes like indictment. Teach them we've always been black magic, never intended to. Thank you.
That was lovely. Thank you very much. So next we will hear, thank you very much, Deborah. Deep, I appreciate that. Now, we will next hear from Jabari Asim. Jabari, I'm going to unmute you. And then,
Here we go.
okay, and then I think I can pin video. Okay, so Jabari Asim is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship in Creative Arts and the author of at least 7 books for adults, including We Can't Breathe, On Black Lives, White Lies, and the Art of Survival, and Stop and Frisk, which he'll be reading from today, as well as 10 books for children. His poems are included in several anthologies, including Furious Flower, African American Poetry from the Black Arts Movement to the Present, and Beyond Frontier, African American Poetry for the 21st Century. After more than a decade at the St. Louis Dispatch and the Washington Post, he now directs the MFA program at Emerson College.
Thank you. And thanks for allowing me to be a part of this event. I'm grateful to be here, especially grateful to have the opportunity to meet, even electronically, Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton, and to hear her work out loud. I've seen it on the page. It's a different experience, an equally exuberant experience, I guess, exhilarating experience to hear it come from her. So I'm grateful to be an eye and ear witness to that. I'm going to read several poems. I'm not going to explain them. I'm just going to give you the titles and roll through the poems. First poem is called Young Americans. Dead children make mad noise when they march, sounding their frustrated yawps over the rooftops of Chicago. Neither wind nor monstrous guns can stop their stomping. Dead children make mad noise when they march. The doomed, solemn-eyed youth of Chicago are putting boots on the ground, gathering in ghostly numbers to haunt us with their disappointment. It's hard to miss them swelling the water tower crowds at rush hour, clogging Cottage Grove inconveniently, taking up all the seats on the L. The Dan Ryan is stop and go from all the phantom overflow as they troop through the city's arteries, south side, west side, all around the town. Battered and battle-hardened, the spirits of collateral children rise up, armed with experience, the worst kind of knowing. The spirits of collateral children drip blood across the big-shouldered city, spattering the landscape like poppies dotting Flanders Field, looking for someone, anyone, to take up their quarrel. They high step in rhythm, according to a cadence only they can hear. Hup, 2, 3, 4. Through that hog butcher history, Sandberg singing niggers, Capone's cut throats, bullets falling like fat rain on a street in Bronzeville. The slaughtered innocents of Chicago, young Americans who loved and were loved, are braving the crossfire of hand-wringing and corruption, the photo-friendly choirs and drive-by eulogies, politicians' cue card declarations of sorrow. The slaughtered innocents of Chicago ain't going nowhere gently, circling the sad metropolis in loud, unearthly ranks. They raise their voices to the bloody sky, above the roar of the monstrous guns and the bullets falling like fat rain. The disappeared. Every portrait posted on the Black and Missing website looks like someone I know. Last seen in parking lots and on porches, at work, leaving church, heading to class, rolling cross country to visit friends. 64,000, mostly missing in New York, Georgia, North Carolina, Maryland, and Florida. Signs of struggle, prints wiped clean, empty cars with engines running. So many women, so little news. All these Americans the thin air has swallowed. No Chandras, Kayleys, or Natalies among them. Phoenix, Shani, Arnika, Sharon, Talana, Latoria. How your smiles stay with us, your winning gleam. In Chile, the mothers and wives of the disappeared would dance in protest at the government gates. How shall we announce our scars and fractures, our sustained despair? I dream of a drumbeat summit, millions of men stepping and sliding in electric syncopation, a train of souls whirling beyond the White House fence. Cancer sold separately. In the South End, we saw a man throw a tantrum outside the walk-up window of a gas station, yelling, sputtering, and shaking. No, not shaking, dancing. Dancing like Samuel L. Jackson in Jungle Fever, cajoling cash from his heartbroken mom. Let me get a Lucy. Damn, a Lucy, man. Let me get one. A Lucy. Apparently, he'd slept on the Surgeon General's warning to Black men, bellowing in public may be hazardous to your health. He was probably too young to remember when Winston's tasted good like a cigarette should. Shelves were lined with Kents, Viceroys, Tarrytons, Salems, Cools, Pall Malls, Lucky Strikes, Marlboros, Bel Airs, all the brands an 8-year-old could fetch from the corner confectionery without a sleepy proprietor blinking an eye. We had helpful jingles then. Now we've lost track of God's infinite variety of flavorful carcinogens. Our man didn't care about any of that. He just wanted a single cigarette, one goddamn Lucy. His voice was rough-edged and ashy, a cough coiled in his chest, waiting to spring. The Asian clerk, his eyes on the end of a long shift, could have been a statue. Damn, you speak English? Maybe. Probably. But he definitely spoke unimpressed. He shrugged and looked beyond the loud mouth to the next person in line. Dissed and dismissed, mocked by the gods, the Black man went operatic, weepy, a luckless sucker in a street corner farce. Cursing his fate and the dumbass clerk, insisting on his right to die a little bit at a time, he pushed and pounded on the reinforced glass as if he could thrust right through and choke him out. Wild things. 2 minutes half naked in the company of at least a dozen men with guns does things to your mind. Each minute becomes 1,000 years. You think of headlines and history. Your great-grandmother raped by white men with guns on the dirt floor of a barn. What she remembered most were those who stood and watched, doing nothing, while the horses turned away in shame and disgust. Men with guns, men smelling of sweat and desperation, pounding on my door. I tried to close it, but they were too strong. A dozen men against one woman, yanked into a hallway of noise, nightmare, lights, screaming cops and yelling neighbors. My towel tugged away, leaving me in underpants, a scrap of fabric between me and the grasping hands of strangers. My bare body pushed and pressed into the cold and unforgiving wall, begging to be let go, praying for mercy and darkness to hide my dark, naked self from the eyes of strange men with guns looking me up and down as they go up and down the stairs. Not one man handing me my towel to cover my breasts. Married for 16 years and 10 went by before my husband saw all of me. My oxygen beyond reach, the space tight as the hold of a ship. Eyes, hands, breath, mean men pressing against me, squeezing, while the good men watch. A neighbor shouts, "Y'all wicked," as the 4-year-old goes down in a cloud of spray. One man's sour breath on my neck, hard against my back, his fingers in my mouth, men with many eyes, hands taking up my air. Neighbors in the stairwell with cameras say I fainted and fell to the floor. The good men stood all around, all around. The good men stood all around. So you think you can dance? Me and rhythm tight as Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, and Mike, turning and sliding in one smooth move, telling a packed house of screaming girls to cool it now. My father always going on about New Edition, Ralph's street slick falsetto, and Johnny G's rumbling like a natural man. I just tell him, "Pop, it hurts me to say it, but New Edition is old edition now. Bobby barely moving these days, looking like he needs a hip replacement, and not a single one of them feeling stupid enough to try a split." Me and my boy Andrew know all the ancient history. Pop say, you can't break the rules unless you know them. So when we not dancing, we on YouTube, checking out the tradition. Early mornings, we get on up like the godfather of soul, stretching and soaking up MJ, popping that crazy robot and dancing machine, his brother's shrink-proof afros bobbing behind him, the temps necktied and double-breasted, showing young America they ain't too proud to beg, the Nicholas brothers taking folks to school, jumping, jive. We got all that in our bones by the time we reach First Avenue. Leap up and ask the strap hangers to clear the middle. Not much room to moonwalk on the A train, so I take to the air. We're formally trained, Andrew explains, both graduates of the MTA Academy, where we majored in rhythm and minored in flight. I'm upside down quick as a nick, curling my ankles around the chrome and letting my body say what words can't. Tourists whip out iPhones while others look through us like we clear as the air they hope will swallow us up as we pass through the populous city. I know those types. Sooner or later, the rhythm is gonna get them. Andrew hasn't even passed the hat before 4 plain clothes pop up and place us under arrest. The foreigners think it's part of the show as they turn and slide us through the doors. Warning, contains graphic violence. Attention all units. Black woman walking eastbound on I-10 near the La Brea on-ramp. Approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall, 135 pounds, early 50s, answers to grandma. Wearing a pink dress and appears to be armed with a purse. If you encounter the suspect, she may resist by walking slowly away. Throw her on her back and squeeze her between your thighs. Raise your fist high and punch her face until she is still. She may resist by continuing to breathe, in which case, raise your fist high and continue to punch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Is she still moving? Punch her again, again, again. Be advised that this is a high-risk pursuit. 1,000 chokeholds from now, Black and brown people will cross at the corners. They will refrain from heaving rocks at panes of glass and stop grilling meat on the sidewalks. 1,000 chokeholds from now, they will stop dancing in subways. They will decline to sell individual untaxed cigarettes. They will not climb from car wrecks to seek assistance. They will not resist arrest by holding on to the hems of their skirts. 1,000 chokeholds from now, Black and brown people will no longer insist on access to taxis. They will not step into elevators when white women are already inside. They will wait patiently at Best Buy when a snot-nosed kid checks and double checks their receipts. 1,000 chokeholds from now, windows will not be broken and neither will heads. Cities will be clean and safe for lovers of local lager, artisanal pickles, and the hipsters next door. 1,000 chokeholds from now, James Q. Wilson won't be nothing but the name of an endowed chair at the American Enterprise Institute, paid for by State Farm, because like a good neighbor, they are always there. The talk. It's more than time we had that talk about what to say and where to walk, how to act and how to strive, how to be upright and stay alive, how to live and learn, how to dig and be dug in return, when to concede, when to risk, how to handle stop and frisk. Keep your hands where they can see. Don't reach for your ID until they're requested quite clearly. Speak to them politely and answer them sincerely. The law varies according to where you are, whether you're traveling by foot or driving a car. It won't help to be Black and proud, nor will you be safer in a crowd. Now, keeping your speech calm and restrained, ask if in fact you're being detained. If the answer is no, you're free to go. If the answer is yes, remain unfazed to avoid being choked, shot, or tased. Give every cop your ear, but none your wit. Don't tempt them to fold, spindle, mutilate, hit, or otherwise cause pain to tendons, bones, muscles, brain. These are things you need to know if you want to safely come and go. But still, there's no guarantee that you will make it home to me. Despite all our care and labor, you might frighten a cop or neighbor whose gun sends you to endless sleep, proving life's unfair and talk is cheap. Lucy's. On certain street corners, a man can scare up a cigarette for just $1. Enough Lucy's over time can be hazardous to health, as deadly as breaking up a fight in an intersection crowded with witnesses. or dashing through drizzle for Skittles and tea. Risks aside, they are a staple of urban commerce, a gross domestic product that helps the underground economy go. Picture Boy Willie and his watermelons, Bearden's bejeweled fishmongers bartering amid a splash of paint. But a black man in the middle of the night knows better than looking for Lucy's beyond his own driveway. Safer instead to root around the glove box for that precious planned ahead pack. Later, he'd say it felt like a firing squad when deputies opened up from behind, leaving him not only smokeless, but 60 years old and shot in the leg. Suspected of stealing his own car in front of his own house, he thought his neighbor was joking when he heard a command to put his hands in the air. This is the last poem. It's called CNN Sends a Man to Ferguson. In Ferguson, the people raised their hands above their heads and praised God, his works, and his mysterious ways. They asked for justice before peace and prayed for suffering to cease. Nighttime brings danger and caprice, wayward men in tanks, lawless police. In Ferguson, the people earned their bread to keep their children fed and a sheltering roof overhead. They drive home with care to avoid a policeman's baleful stare and the siren's dreadful blare. I broadcast and folks lean in to absorb my clever spin, my glossy lips, my chiseled chin. Behind me, history marches past. In Ferguson is hip hop, heavy bass, that rhythm of summer, rhymes, fury, grace, born of a particular time and place, battling the heat, clawing the troubling dust. There's love too in Ferguson, softness and hardness and grateful receiving, out of anguish a resilient weaving of heart and flesh and breath, a respite from riotous, impudent death. In Ferguson, they know the world prefers to turn away, ignoring the forces of corruption at play, in a little town making a killing from tickets, fines, and occasional blood spilling. I had blamed their circumstance on absent fathers and sagging pants. But after 2 days here, I can see why the revolution won't be on TV. I wonder as I wander among these vines, streaming loops and Twitter bugs scrambling for scoops. I'd scratch my head, but I'd muss my hair. How to get this soundbite on the air. People in Ferguson are like people everywhere. An Emmy, a Peabody. I imagine accolades between the tear gas and shot grenades. It's true, some are talking trash and urging others to plunder and smash, but amid the artillery and armored thugs who curse and shove, I've seen mostly peaceful people acting out of love. In days to come, arguments and retorts, double talking cops and missing incident reports. Live at 5, I remind the world while we're watching this town. His name was Michael Brown. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jameer. That was wonderful. Y'all both did a beautiful job. Now, we were going to have like about 10 minutes of kind of a conversation. And if you wanted to incorporate any questions, if anyone has a question they would like to put in the chat box, and that would, and Deep or Jameer will entertain that. So if y'all could both, the two of you could unmute yourselves and kind of talk together, that would be terrific.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Deborah D.E.E.P, Mouton. Wonderful work.
It's great to hear you. You too.
Wonderful work. And I think Kate has said this to me before, but it's kind of remarkable how much the work is in conversation, not just between the two books, but with what a lot of writers are confronting and expressing now.
Right. That was actually one of the first things I was going to ask you, which is a question that people have asked me, and I'm just going to defer it on over to you because I know my answer, which is like, why are we still writing about this? I hear so many, especially Black poets say, like, I'm tired of writing poems about Black people dying, and this is triggering, and we're selling ourselves and selling our trauma. Why did you feel like it was important to still, knowing that that was kind of the perception within the culture, that it was still important to write a book that, like, and captured this struggle that's still happening?
Well, I see part of my mission as a writer, not just as a poet, because I'm writing in these different genres, and
Right.
hopefully the work within the genres is also in conversation, um, with the other work. And so, I mean, there are a couple of things, a couple of impulses that are driving me there. One is Toni Morrison's work on the master narrative, which is, this sort of the state-sponsored message. In this case, how Black people are, how we behave, what's important to us, how we live, love, whether we're worthy of life and love, all of that. And so I'm kind of countering that official narrative, which says that we're not worthy of any of those things, which has consistently argued for 400 years that we're less than human. So that's part of it. The other part of it is I see myself as a recorder of deeds. I think it's important that these events be recorded and documented, not just as video, but filtered through the consciousness of artists like ourselves, and not just poets, but visual artists and dancers and choreographers and musicians, composers, all of those people. And so I think the work is in conversation, even outside of our little boxes, our little genres. But it's also gratifying, that there's this overlap. That say there's a poet in Texas addressing these things, and there's a poet in Massachusetts addressing these things, and there's another poet in New York, and we each have different consciousness but similar experiences, right? And so the work has the similarity, but also this remarkable variety that really makes me want to celebrate it, because I think that the lines that I come up with are lines that only I could come up with. And similarly for you, the lines that you come up with, when you say in the wilderness of the kitchen, you have that line, it's like, it's a wonderful line. And I would describe the experience in my kitchen differently, right? With different language, but they kind of speak to each other in a way. And I think the particular value of work like yours is it actually goes outside the community. It works on two levels. It communicates easily with someone like me who's had a similar experience, but also communicates very clearly, with a powerful degree of clarity, people outside that community. So it's sort of it's a long answer to a short question, but those are all the things that, listening to you read and thinking about my own work kind of prompted.
Yeah, I don't think that was long. I think that was like about what I try to answer to. So yeah, I was struck kind of by your breadth of work, of thinking about the fact that you've worked in all these different genres, and that I'm always struggling to genre my work. Right, I'm always like creating this thing, and then like Kate will tell you, and then I call her and I'm like, I'm gonna send you something. Tell me what genre it goes in, because I have no idea at this point. Right. So why did you feel like this was important for it to be specifically poetry? Why was that the thing that you came to, and like, why did you land in poetry for this?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working a lot in nonfiction, and one of the things that I've been working in nonfiction is the experience of being in a black body, of living in a black body, and moving in a black body through spaces where there aren't many black bodies, which has been my experience almost all of my life, despite having been born and raised in an all black community. I went to white schools. I was that black kid. At work, I've always been that black guy. There's never more than like 3 in any workplace I've ever been in, right? So I'm very aware of that experience of inhabiting this skin, what that experience is like, and then going home to my house where my wife and kids look like me, and there's a different comfort zone there, and how important it is to be in that space and recharge and then go back. And then so I just kind of began with that idea. What is this experience like in this body? And I guess with poetry, a difference for me is poetry is less deliberate for me. Like when I'm writing an essay, I say, I'm going to write an essay about this particular thing. Let me start outlining. Whereas with poetry, it's more listening. I just kind of sit back and see what comes to me and then try to gently shape it, but with far less deliberation than I do with nonfiction. What's your experience like?
The exact opposite, which I think is really interesting. For me, nonfiction work is kind of like it's very easy. It comes out very fluid. And for me, I obsess over poetry. I'm like, what's the difference between jelly and jam? Like, I'm just really anal about like specific words and where things are and where line breaks are. I mean, I probably can get lost in creating. It's funny because to think of like, I wrote a book that's, 7 or a manuscript that's like 60,000 words in probably the same amount of time that I wrote Newsworthy, which is only, about, a few poems. And so for me, like just the mental labor of kind of sitting with it, wrestling with it, thinking about how close it is. It's just funny to hear that you kind of approach nonfiction the same way that I approach
Yeah.
poetry. So
Yeah. Yeah. And to your earlier point about people saying to poets, why are we still writing about these things? One of the things that I often talk about, the great African-American poet Sterling Brown wrote this amazing poem called Southern Cop, which is, I mean, if I took his name off of it and slipped it into your collection, no one would notice. If I took his name off of it and slipped it into my collection, no one would notice, right? But it came out in 1936, right?
Yeah.
And one of the poets who mentored me many years ago when I was younger, his name is Quincy Troupe. He's a New York-based poet. And he said to me, look, I love flowers. I want to write about flowers sometime. I want to write whole books about flowers. And every time I sit down to write about flowers, the policemen, they kill somebody. And then I end up writing about this other thing, So it's like we're pushing back against these narrow confines the world wants to put us in as artists. But at the same time, we are responding to events,
That's so funny because I actually have a poem that's about bluebonnets, and halfway through it's like I wish I could write about bluebonnets and not think of how they like blacken and die against the ground. Like it is that thing of like I can't. The beauty of Ross Gay is that he can like fully envelop nature and Jericho Brown, right? They can like fully like live in that, and I just wrestle so difficult with being able to like pause one thought to entertain that space of joy. So like where for you then do you build room for joy in your work? Like what does that look like for you?
Well, and if I'm aware of a certain heaviness in the work that reflects the heaviness of the world, I do look for places to inject levity because I like to laugh.
Right.
And the great African-American poet Hakeem Madhubuti years ago, he said, laughter is a form of resistance, right? Because we're not supposed to laugh either. And then to come back to Sterling Brown, so there's a great poem, Slim in Atlanta, where he talks about, it was illegal for Black people to laugh, so they would line up and take turns laughing in a telephone booth. I
have to go look up that. That's great.
Oh, it's terrific. It's terrific. And then, I also think of the late white poet, Jack Gilbert, who has this line, we must risk delight. Right. And I absolutely love that because this poem is like, okay, we know all these horrible things are happening. We're not going to pretend like they're not happening. But at the same time, in our little circles, our little zones, our families, our friendships, we must risk delight. So I'm always looking for the opportunity to risk delight, even while acknowledging, all these other things are happening.
Yeah. I love that. That line is great. I completely agree with that. I often say joy doesn't have to have permission from sorrow, right? Like the idea that one doesn't have to stop for the other one to exist, right?
Yeah.
But that they live next to each other. That some of the times I found the most joy were like funerals, in the repast afterwards, where you're just talking nonsense and giggling, and that should be a really somber time and a sorrowful time, but you find the most joy there. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, and that's the way different cultures speak to each other. Because listening to you say that reminds me of the first time I saw an Irish wake on television, right? And by the end of it, everyone was sort of intoxicated and real happy and laughing, and I said, and it also reminds me of New Orleans, the second line, right? Second line celebration, right? So I like the way cultures at their most elevated or their most eloquent are speaking across these lines to each other,
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so then my other question, I'm like looking at my little cheat sheet. So one of my questions was, so we kind of have this great ability, especially like virtually, that people kind of get to be observers in their own spaces of kind of taking on this work and looking at what we created or listening. How do we start moving people beyond just being observers to being accomplices to this greater understanding of dismantling systemic racism and, unpacking things like police brutality? Like, how does our work start to push people in the direction of solution?
Well, hopefully the work itself is doing part of that work. And then also, having done work as an activist and as a teacher, I'm at a stage where I'm very comfortable with the idea that my main responsibility is to express the need for change through the work itself, right? So I'm focusing more and more on that. Because like, sometimes you'll give a talk, and the talk will go well. And especially, this has been my experience in African American audiences. Someone will say, "You should run for office. You should do this. You should do that." Right? And those impulses are very positive. But I say, no, actually, I should do what I'm doing. Right?
Correct.
That's what I'm here to do. There are other people who can do those things, right? And so I also think about Chinua Achebe, who once said, writers don't give prescriptions; they give headaches, right?
Yeah,
Right. And
correct.
so that's part of what I'm doing, but I do defer and refer to people who are doing other kinds of work, right? Like Equal Justice Initiative, for example, that we're donating portions of proceeds from the sale of the book. There are people doing that work, and it's their role to do that work, and it's my role to do what I do, right? So I usually defer, but also, I try to answer it with a degree of humility, right? Saying, Leron Bennett Jr., the great African-American historian, said, it's not important that all Black people do the same thing. It's more important that we all do something, right? And my something is writing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely. And I found myself, I was in a panel, was it last year? I think I was at Texas Book Fest, and they had us on this panel that was about activism and art. And the two people who were on the panel with me were like, writing is not activism. And I was like, why are you on this panel? Like, you joined a panel that literally argues the thing that you're arguing against. And I was like, I look at people like James Baldwin and I say he wasn't an activist in that case, right? Like, how do you quantify that someone like that who's so monumental in thinking about how we start to break down and understand race relations, especially, in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, whatever, right? How do you discount his work as activist? Like, I don't understand. So I love hearing you kind of say that, that this can be your lane for, stirring the pot and kind of pushing into that thought and giving back to the kind of idea and the contribution of activism at the same time as you're kind of creating the work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, Baldwin was under so much pressure when he was living in Europe to return to the States and be more of an activist, and it's like you said, it's almost like they were dismissing the work that he was doing there by putting pen to paper, which has turned out, that's the work that we keep returning to now when we're talking about Baldwin. It's this work he wrote in a secluded chalet in the Swiss Alps. And a lot of that work was brilliant, and I'm so glad that he had the resources and the wherewithal to get it out. He also argued that sometimes he needed to be at a remove from the center of the action, the center of the turmoil, so that he could get it down, right? And so, yeah.
I found myself even writing in Newsworthy. I gave myself kind of like, I have to stop at Sandra Bland, because like before I was done, then it was Philando Castile, right? Then there was, and I wish that I had been able to remove myself a little bit just to kind of wrap my thoughts around, the final statements of the book without also being plagued with the continuous thing that's happening around you, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally feel that. When I was working on We Can't Breathe, which came out before Stop and Frisk, I actually had that conversation with my editor in terms of, where do you end this, right? Where do you end this discussion? And I said to her, look, several more unarmed Black people are going to be killed between my completing this manuscript and the manuscript arriving in stores. It's impossible to be up to the minute because, racism isn't up to the minute. It's a continuous, ongoing process, and as writers, we can jump in and express when we can, while being mindful, that it's this much larger struggle that doesn't have a pause button,
Yeah, and as much as we wanted to, doesn't have an end right now, unfortunately, right?
Yeah. So how do you balance, or maybe balance is the wrong word, but I'm going to throw this question at you because I get it all the time. My wife and I have 5 children. They're mostly grown now. We only have 2 at home. They're 22 and 19. But
you made my whole uterus like jump out of my soul when you said that.
I'll tell my wife you said that. But we're often asked, she's a theater artist. We work in art. How do you make the art and have this family? So I'm gonna throw that question at you because you made some references to your kids while we were talking.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just put your head down and you go day by day, to be really honest. You know,
Yeah.
people always ask me, do I have a practice? Do I have a writing time? And I just laugh in
Yeah.
their faces, right? And I'm like,
Yep.
no,
Yep.
what? Like, I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. No, there's no writing time. Like, writing time is like the few minutes that I'm sitting on the toilet before my 3-year-old comes in and wants a popsicle, and my 7-year-old needs her tablet recharged, right? Like,
Yep.
and so I think that, you know, balance is not the word. I think making
Yeah.
space for both things. I think because my kids understand that I'm an artist,
Mm.
and that's not something I try to shy away from or hide from them in any way, shape, or form. You know, they're at readings, they're watching mommy be surrounded on the floor with all her pages that you cannot step on because I just made that pile, right? Um, and that's become so much of just who they are and how the world works around them that, you know, they know mommy's door is closed, she's probably writing, you need to knock, right? And she's not going to hear anything you say because she's like in the zone, and we're going to have to ask her 6 more times, right?
Mm.
And I think that just that normalcy of it always existing and never, like, neither ever ceases, right? um and my daughter writes. She's been
Mm.
writing. She's been on, you know, performing on microphone since she was 4. You know, like writing little poems and things. And she brings me
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
now. You know, more and more poems and more stories. And so, I think just the more normal it is to who you are, the easier it is to try to accommodate both thoughts. You know, and the kids, they kind of just
Sure.
acclimate to it. You know, to whatever you got going on. That's my best answer. I know it's probably not a great one for all those people looking for
No,
some,
it's a.
oh, I ain't got it.
No, no, I get it because people have said to me, um, you know, I'm a writer too, and you know, what I need is I need a quiet, you know, private space where, and I like you, I laugh because I'm like, I'm not familiar with that. And if I were
Yeah.
waiting on that, I wouldn't have, you know, produced anything up to this point.
Yeah, I
So,
actually I was at a residency last summer, and one of the facilitators was like, if you want to be a writer, don't have children. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that, like all in my soul, right? And I was also like,
yeah,
well, what does that do for everybody in here who already has a child? Like, give them
right,
that,
right,
right?
right.
And he was just like, basically, you're gonna have to just abandon your dream because children will get in the way. And I was like, you know, Lucille Clifton had 5 kids too, and she just shortened the poems, right? Like, she found a way. Like,
Right,
it's okay, we'll figure it out, you know.
right, right.
And so it's good to see more parents and more people who have other things going on in their lives. You know, I take care of my parents and my kids, and I'm married, you know, so there's a
Yeah,
lot of people who could potentially, you know, interfere with the work if that's how you see them. But I think seeing all of them as muses for the work, right? All of them as
yes.
ears that hear things, and things that you do to kind of help include them. You know, they make my greatest works. They really do. Like the reactions to them and the inclusion of them. So I wouldn't trade it.
Yeah, yeah. I often tell people, you know, my children are my first readers.
Yep.
My children and my wife, they're my first editors, my first critics. You know, so I value their feedback actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see we have a good question in the chat asking if we have some book recommendations.
Ooh. Okay. So I could recommend like all classic things and all the things. I'm just gonna recommend the thing that I most recently read that I was magically in love with, which was Interior Chinatown.
Mm.
Have you heard of this book? It's
Mm-mm,
amazing.
no, no, no.
And so the writer decided that I think his name is Charles Yu. Yeah, I'm like looking on my shelf. I think it's
Mhm.
Charles Yu. Um, and he decided that he was going to tell the story of an Asian actor in the background of Law and Order, like who wanted to become a kung fu
Yeah,
master, right?
yeah,
And talk about how race in Hollywood like paints the system as being a very like black and white show, and that he falls in the gray, and that there's so much in trying to like climb out of the gray. You right to polarize yourself for the sake of success. And at
yeah,
what point in time do you abandon that? But it's written in a way that it's like halfway screenplay, halfway fiction. It's just a really brilliant way of kind of like looking at a hybrid works, which I'm in love with. And telling a story that I found myself simultaneously laughing and cringing at, you know, and and also seeing that the things that I was laughing at, I also was cringing at, right? You know, like, and so that there's
yeah,
this
yeah.
layer of, you know, what has become normal to us to kind of cue us towards laughter that is just discomfort. And so I just found it to be a really, really great book. And so I'll throw that one out. Interior Chinatown, Charles, you guys should get that book.
That sounds excellent. I'm gonna go with a couple of oldies but goodies. The collected poems of Gwendolyn Brooks.
Yes.
And Play Ebony, Play Ivory by great African-American poet Henry Dumas, who was killed by a policeman in 1968 when he was running for a subway train. Those two poets are probably my biggest influences. I encountered Dumas's work in a used bookstore when I was in college, changed my life. His work had been published posthumously. He was already gone. Published by Random House by a then little known editor named Toni Morrison, who discovered him and put his work out there. And Gwendolyn Brooks, because she really changed my life in person by showing up on my campus for 3 days. And I became so mesmerized by her first appearance that I skipped all my courses for 3 days and basically just stalked her. And at the end of those 3 days, she was very nice about it, because she was there. She was there at the behest of the Women's Studies Residential College, which was an all-white residential college, young white feminists, and so they kind of had her to themselves. And I found out about it, and I was like, I have to be a part of this, right? And she'd look up, and I'd be that black guy sitting in the middle of the front row, and she'd kind of nod and smile. But at the end of the 3 days, I called my parents and said, I'm changing my major from political science. I'm not going to law school. I'm going to be a writer. This is it. This woman is everything. And they were like, he must be on drugs. He must be experimenting with drugs. So it was a real challenge to get them to come around. But so I owe so much to those particular poets, among many. So I would say Play Ebony, Play Ivory by Henry Dumas, and the collected poems of Gwendolyn Brooks.
I love it. I felt the same way about Giovanni. If it just dropping that in there, I followed her around too. So
Nikki Giovanni.
Yeah.
So it looks like we have 2 questions in the chat. Maybe we could take those 2 and then kind of tie it up since we're getting close.
Okay.
So do y'all see that?
Yeah, I think one of them was for you. It was looking at women in your work. So the line that stuck out to me was "so many women, so little news," which I was like, oh, I hate that I didn't write that. And I think that you talking a little bit about how you personify women, the importance of women in this conversation, how women impact your work.
Yeah, sure. It starts, of course, with Gwendolyn Brooks, as we know, as a woman, and how much her work shaped and influenced me. But it also comes a lot from personal experience. The first lens that I write from is probably that of a husband. My wife and I have been together for 37 years. And so it's like when people talk about violence to Black men, they say, well, I have a son and I can relate to it that way. And, I can get that. I have 4 sons. I get that. But, but I have a daughter and I have a wife. Right. And so when I think about these 64,000 missing Black women, I imagine my Black wife not being across the table from me, not being in my bed beside me, not being in the car beside, all these different places. So my personal experience very much fuels and prompts these observations about Black women. And that's the personal part of it. But then the larger part of it is what you spoke to so eloquently, I think, that not enough attention is paid, right? And I do feel part of my responsibility as a writer is to join voices like yours in pointing these things out.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, I'm like trying not to do commentary. Okay, so the last one was, how much do you feel like you need to translate your work to non-Black people? Can I answer this one?
Yes, please.
With my pensive thought hand?
Yes, yes.
So I actually took Newsworthy to a residency probably 2 years before I got picked up by Bloomsday, which shout out to Bloomsday always. And as they were reading it, it was majority white people at the residency. There was a couple Latinx writers. I think there was 2 other Black writers. One was leading the workshop, but overall majority white writers. And I immediately started getting notes like, can you define who Sally Walker is? Can you put a footnote? Can you do this? And I asked one of the people leading the workshop, how much of this do I need to translate, right? Like how much do I need to kind of explain before the poem? And the answer, and I quote, so anyone who has a problem with cussing, oh well, this is the answer I got, which was not a motherfucking thing. And I asked for explanation. They were like, because nobody explained to you who Euripides is, because nobody had to unpack to you a biblical reference, like, because like you have been for so many years unpacking and translating white works to your own cultural understanding that no, it's now time that people who are not Black start to translate for themselves. And you can do all that you can in making it accessible, but outside of that accessibility, people just need to like Google stuff. Like, just figure it out. And so I think I'm always aware of audience, right? Coming from a performance background, especially, I'm always really aware of what an audience is going to take away. Is my message translating? But at some point in time, the message is the message and is an unaltered message. And so people are going to take away what they think. And there's just no way, I think, to fully translate in a way that is not going to leave room for someone else's mistranslation of the work. So that would be my answer.
That sounds good to me. I agree.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And I'm going to give a little pitch for these two wonderful books. So we
Please
have
do.
Stop and Frisk and Newsworthy, Malvern Books, Austin, Texas. You can get your copy if you want to, if you're here in town, or if you want to have us ship it out to you, if you call 512-322-2097, or you could go to our website, malvernbooks.com, and there's an email address there, info@malvernbooks.com. Send us an email. If you're not in town and you'd like to have it shipped to you as opposed to doing curbside pickup or having us send it, you can also go through our website to bookshop.org and then have it mailed to you there. Of course, we'd prefer you come to us because, you know, that works out great for us, but we're so happy that you're here. I mean, it was a real honor to host both D.E.E.P Mouton, and I hope I get this right, Mouton.
You're getting it right. You're totally getting it right. You're fine.
I get nervous. and Jabari Asim, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. It was a wonderful evening. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Everybody take care.
Take care. Have a safe
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.